Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Personalized Learning Reimagined, a live stream event. We are live, and you're joining hundreds of other educational leaders who believe in the transformational power of student-centered learning and teaching. You'll be hearing from experts, district leaders, teachers as they talk about building agency, student ownership, and relationships, putting the person back into personalized learning. I'm Ben Politzer, today's MC, and Education Elements is today's host. Education Elements is a national K-12 consulting firm working with school districts on complex challenges that touch on leadership, equity, branding, teaching and learning, and strategic planning. We're a critical friend in helping K-12 leaders like you make transformational change. And we do it together through buy-in, responsiveness, good fun, and expertise. Fundamentally, we believe that schools grow when people grow. At this point, we would love for you to introduce yourself and be part of this conversation. Add your name in the chat stream, introduce yourself, what's your name, and what district and state are you from? So go ahead and introduce yourself. Good to see you, Kate. Glad you're here from Wisconsin. And we have so many others as well. Nice to see you, Vicky. Wow, we got a lot of folks coming online. We hope to continue the conversation in the chat throughout the event. In fact, we may have our panelists and guests engage with you and your questions and comments. So keep them coming. And with that, we're very excited to begin with everyone. Already a new school year is upon us, and we are navigating both new realities and pre-existing challenges. That said, we at Education Elements have learned a great deal in the last several years through our daily work with students, families, experts, and educators. And we're reflecting on lessons learned throughout the recent pandemic. We better understand what is necessary for our students and where educators have the greatest impact, which is why together we are reimagining personalized learning. We have a packed agenda today, including a keynote from Wes Kishnick, also an expert panel of educators, a conversation with our Education Elements team, and a look inside several classrooms. Without further ado, I want to turn it over to Anthony Kim, expert, author, to frame today's conversation and introduce today's keynote. So Anthony.
All right, what's up, everyone? I'm glad to be here, and thank you so much for making time to join us today. I'm super excited to kind of open this up. They only gave me a few minutes, so I'm glad that I'm first. But what I wanted to share with you are just some ideas around how we got started in this. And the thing that I wanted you guys to put in the chat, because this is going to help me too, is just one or two words. How can we get more than a year's worth of gain in 1 year in education, right? So how can we help students learn more than a year's worth of, get more than a year's worth of learning in 1 year? Because there are ways that I want to share with you. And I think personalized learning is kind of the umbrella that will allow us to do this. And so let me start with how we got to this point, right? 10 years ago, I started Education Elements. And when we started Education Elements, we launched a school that got these incredible results. And through these results, I wanted to show you some of the examples of what this looks like. What does it actually look like in data in order to get more than a year's worth of gain? And so this next slide shows you exactly what it looks like. First of all, like if you look at this, at the beginning of the year, students started at less than 90% of the students were, or about 90% of the students were below grade level. By the end of the year, most of the students were above grade level. These were significant gains just by doing personalized learning. And what we implemented was a form of blended learning called station rotation using digital content, but the focus was using data for learning as well as small group differentiated instruction. So in the next slide, I wanted to show you what this means when we try to actually get more than a year's worth of gains. And what that looks like is this. you could see the dotted line, a normal classroom curve at the end of a year, and I'm using the Chicago STEP assessment. And this is real data. It would look something like this, where students by the end of the year from kindergarten most of the students would be at kindergarten level proficiency. The solid line is actually the results of the students that we served. And the solid line shows that at the end of kindergarten, kids were, a large percentage of kids were close to a full year, grade level 1 of proficiency. So basically at the end of kindergarten, kids were able to read at first grade level. There were even kids that were able to read at second grade level. And so what I wanted to show you is when we talk about using personalized learning to get more than a year's worth of gain, this is what I'm talking about. We're shifting the whole bell curve forward. So I wanted to kind of go to the next slide and share with you, this comes from John Hattie, and this comes from how we can actually get more than a year's worth of results in 1 year. And what he does is he studied all of these things, and these are all available to us right now, providing feedback, teacher clarity, classroom discussion. These are all things that allow for better outcomes and more than a year's worth of gain. And so if we want to close that gap that we're seeing, the slide that we've talked about, the gap that's always existed, we have to put instructional practices in that produce more than a year's worth of gain. And so if we go to the next slide, what I wanted you to put in the chat now is, why wait? What can we start doing right away in order to get these results? And I'm excited to introduce my friend, Wes. I think I got a few minutes to even just talk today because they just wanted me to bring Wes and introduce Wes. And they're like, okay, we got a couple minutes for you, Anthony. But Wes is not only a good instructional leader, but he is my friend in working out. So thanks, Wes, for joining us. I'm happy to introduce you. And let's have Wes give his talk.
Thank you, Anthony. That was incredible and at the same time humbling, humiliating, but in all good ways. So appreciated. Let's jump into it, my friends. We have lots to talk about today. And quite frankly, not a lot of time. So I know this is the point in time where I'm supposed to give you my bio and tell you about myself, but let's be honest, nobody really cares. And we have more important things to discuss. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Barbara, I see you out there from Vienna. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate everyone who joins us and is watching virtually and asynchronously as well. Let's talk about what's going on in education right now. There's a slight identity crisis that we are suffering from. And that comes from our propensity in education to sort of like chase this pendulum back and forth that continuously swings in our field, where, we lock into things that we think are really important, and then something new comes along and we chase that thing. And we decide we are either about old school skills or new school skills. Let me save you a ton of travel today, my friends. I'll save you a ton of travel. I've been able to work with teachers and school leaders from every single country in every single state in this country in more than 30 countries around the world. And I will tell you, the world's most phenomenal teachers don't embrace this culture of or, where they decide they're either about old school skills or they're about new school skills. Some of our colleagues self-identify in this way. Some of our colleagues self-identify as either old school teachers or new school teachers. And what I want to make sure that we all understand today is that the world's most masterful teachers don't embrace a culture of or. They embrace a culture of and. And let's talk about the culture of and for just a moment. So wherever you are, go ahead and just as you're watching here, hold up both of your fists like this, right? Hold up both of your fists like this, and let's talk about the culture of or for just a moment. In order to do so, on your right hand, stick out your thumb, and on your left hand, stick out your pinky. That's your first challenge. Some of us are struggling already. That's all right. If that's you, look down. Let's talk about the culture of or. For the longest time in education, we were traveling this direction, this direction, this direction. And then technology arrived. And more recently, global pandemic arrived. And at a moment's notice, the world asked us to switch everything about what we were doing. And try that now. What you'll discover, my favorite are those of you who are out there who have one hand like this and the other one that looks like this. Look down. Some of you will discover really quickly you are that person. All right, let's try it one more time. Shake it out, shake it out. Hold them up like this. Right hand thumb, left hand pinky. Again, for the longest time in education, we were traveling this direction, this direction, this direction. And then a pandemic arrived, technology arrived, and in a moment's notice, the world asked us to switch. And what we're discovering, what our teachers are discovering, what our school and district leaders are discovering, is that transition is difficult. It's really difficult. Drop your hands. The transition from what we've always done to now what we need to do is really difficult. And what we're discovering is that it's fraught with speed bumps and opportunities to stumble and fail and fail and fail. But what we have to understand is this. The world's most masterful teachers don't embrace a culture of or, where they decide they're about old school skills or old school tools, or they decide they're about new school skills and new school tools. The world's most masterful teachers embrace a culture of and they understand the value of being able to switch back and forth at will between old, new, old, new, old, new. And so I want to talk about the culture of and today because it's really, really important. Why is it so important? I'll tell you this. I'm about to make a bold statement that I cannot believe for the life of me is a bold statement. But in our current educational climate, this is a bold statement. Are you ready? Here's my bold statement. Education is not broken. Education is not broken. Our schools are not broken. The system is not broken. Now, I'm sure lots of you out there have heard a completely different narrative that schools are broken, teaching is broken, our system is broken. And I'll tell you, I'll tell you really clearly, I find those statements profoundly insulting. They're insulting to our predecessors, the teachers who came before us, many of whom are responsible for us having so many of the skills that we have right now. They're responsible to practice. They're insulting to teachers who are in classrooms right now, as we speak, in the midst of global pandemic, doing incredible things for our children under nearly impossible circumstances. Furthermore, this notion that education is broken is entirely untrue, and I'll prove it right now. Anyone in the chat window, do me a favor, in the chat window, anyone care to guess what the national graduation rate was in 1910? What percentage of kids you think we graduated from high school? Jot it down. Throw it down in the chat window. Take a swag at it. What percentage of kids do you think we graduated from high school in 1910? That's the question. Take a shot. No right or wrong answers. You don't have enough information at this point. What percentage of kids do you think we graduated from high school in 1910? Right? Great guesses. 30%, 33%. Wow. Tammy's all the way down at 15%. Great guesses. Great guesses. Here's what you need to know. In 1910, the U.S. graduation rate was 8%. 8%. You know what's crazy? That's not 8% of all children. That's 8% of the children that in 1910 we allowed to go to high school. Keeping in mind that in 1910, we traditionally allowed one group of kids to go to high school, and they all looked like me. And we only graduated 8% of those kids. Furthermore, in 1910, we used to make kids take a test to even get into high school. Want to know what one of the test questions was to get into high school in 1910? Name the 5 senses. In 1910, if you could name the 5 senses, people looked at you and said, that guy is high school ready. And we only graduated 8% of those kids. Now, in 2011, the U.S. Department of Education started to standardize how we measure graduation rates nationwide, and guess what they discovered? They discovered that by 2011, the national graduation rate had risen to 79% of all children. And then we set record graduation rates in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2016, graduating as many as 84% of our kids nationwide. Anyone care to guess what the current national graduation rate is? 88% of all children. My friends, put eyes on me. We are graduating and educating more children with greater success and with more rigor than ever before in our nation's history. And nobody knows it, not even us. Now, I'm worried that what some of you think you're hearing me say is that education is perfect. That is not what I'm saying. Right? That is not what I'm saying. We still have massive gaps and massive discrepancies to overcome relative to things like race and socioeconomics. Quite frankly, it's criminal that we can guess with relative accuracy about how much or how little a child will succeed based on the zip code in which they're born. I am not saying that education is perfect, but this notion that education is broken beyond repair is entirely untrue. Entirely untrue. Now, let's pause for just a moment because some of you, and I can see it showing up in the chat window, some of you are starting to look at this data with skepticism. Some of you are just like, man, well, yeah, that's graduation data and graduation statistics are really hard. You know who else thought so? Johns Hopkins University. And in 2016, Johns Hopkins did the largest ever study of nationwide graduation rates. And here's what they discovered. They discovered that things like watered down graduation requirements, mistaken calculations, push-outs of unsuccessful students, none of those things, none of them were widespread enough to have inflated the US graduation rate, which is currently at an all-time high. My friends, education is not broken. Put eyes on me, please. I'm begging you. Stop letting people who don't know our profession tell us about it as though they know. Yes, there are things that we still need to fix. Yes, we need to focus on more relevant skills. Yes, we need to fix things like the gaps that exist between race and socioeconomics. But the notion that the system is broken beyond repair is entirely untrue. Now, having said that, let's talk about what's happening in education. Let's talk about what's going on. There is so much to get excited about in our field right now. I mean, take a look at the stuff, some of the stuff that Education Elements is capable of, right? Take a look at how we're able to personalize learning and transform instruction for kids and support educators and kids in ways that we never could before, right? You'll go out and you'll look at this stuff, and here's the challenge. It will lead you to a place where you look at the stuff that's possible with tools and content like this, and you'll say to yourself, like, ooh, this is really exciting. And I want us to pause for just a moment, and I want us to be careful. Why? Because that moment of excitement is responsible for the death of more great teaching and learning than any other since the dawn of the one-room schoolhouse. Let's talk about it for a second. Why? Because excitement can lead us to poor decision-making. So here's a perfect example. I'll tell you this. Every once in a while when I travel, I get the opportunity to take my wife and my children with me. Not long ago, I was asked to do a keynote in Pasadena, California, and I was the afternoon keynote to kick off the conference. So I had the whole first part of the day free. So I told my wife, Molly, I said, hey, why don't you come out to Los Angeles with me? I've got all these extra points. My parents can watch the kids. We'll stay the night. I'll do the keynote, and then we'll come home. So she said, sure. So we go out, we fly out to Los Angeles, and we go to this conference in Pasadena, stayed the night, woke up the next morning, again, had the whole day free. And I had noticed earlier that there was a breakfast restaurant around the corner from our hotel. So I said, hey, Molly, let's go have breakfast at this little restaurant. So we walk into this restaurant, real small, hole in the wall type place, one of those awesome places to go eat. And as we walked into this restaurant, we sit down, and you should know, very, very small. There's maybe 10 people in this whole restaurant. And so as we're sitting there, I'm sitting across from my wife. There's a wall behind me and a hallway that leads down to a bathroom. And my wife behind her, the restaurant is laid out. So as we're eating breakfast, I'm also just kind of people watching there in the restaurant. And as we're sitting there eating, into this restaurant walks Denzel Washington. Now, I'll tell you this, because I travel so often, I see famous people all the time. And I'll tell you 99.9% of the time, I could not care less. But I think we can all admit for just a second, Denzel's a pretty decent celebrity sighting. So he walks into this restaurant. Remember, there's maybe 10 of us in there, and everyone notices. Everyone notices. But everyone's being real cool. Nobody's asking him for pictures or anything. But everyone's having like that side mouth conversation of like, you see that? That's Denzel Washington over there, right? Like you can hear the murmur around the room. I realize a couple minutes later that the only person who hasn't seen him walk in, yeah, Natalie, pretty decent indeed. I realized that the only person who hasn't seen him walk in is my wife, because remember, her back is to the restaurant. So like the good, dutiful husband I am, I leaned forward and I said to my wife, I said, Molly, don't turn around. Yes, I hear it. I said, Molly, don't turn around. But Denzel Washington just walked into this restaurant. My friends, what do you think my wife did? Right? Like an owl. She whips her head 180 degrees and stares at Denzel for what I, as her husband, can only describe as an uncomfortable amount of time, right? She stares at Denzel so long that I go back to eating my breakfast. And when she finally turns her head back around to look at me, she leans forward and she says to me in her quietest, most discreet, and most demure voice, he's more beautiful than I imagined, right? She says it loud in a room that is very small. And when she does, everyone turns around and looks at us. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. At this moment, over my wife's shoulder, Denzel Washington is now looking me dead in my eye. Denzel Washington is looking me dead in my eye, and everyone's sort of waiting for my response to this awkward moment that my wife has created for us. So I did the only thing I could think of. I looked back at Denzel and I gave him one of these. Right? I give Denzel the old thumbs up. And when I do, he smiles at me like that famous Denzel smile. And when he smiled at me, I will admit to you fully, I thought to myself, damn, this dude is super handsome. So we go on about eating our breakfast. I'm trying to re-engage my wife in conversation. She is finding all kinds of reasons to do like light stretching or just like anything she can possibly do to turn around, right? Well, at one point, Denzel stands up from his table and he walks right past our table. Because remember, the bathroom is behind me. Well, when he walks right past our table, my wife watches him walk all the way into the bathroom. And when the door closes behind him, she turns, looks at me, and says, "You should go in there." And I said, that's the opposite of what I should do. I said to my wife, I said, "Molly, like people get arrested for things like that." And then she says, honest to God, these were her exact words. She says, "No, go in there, start talking to him. What if you become friends?" And I, s- I said to my wife, I said, "Molly, we've been to a lot of meals together." I said, "When in our history have I ever gotten up from the table to use the bathroom and returned to our table with another person and said to you, 'Meet my new friend'?" Spoiler alert, never, not once, not ever has that happened. So, why do I tell you that story? Because it's so important for us to understand that excitement can lead to poor decision making. And that's what's happening in our nation's schools because there's so much to get excited about. Think about, like I said, think about everything we can do with tools like in the functionality that shows up in things like education elements. Think about all the other stuff that's out there right now. Think about the amazing things that teachers can do with all of the incredible tools that exist in our field right now. It's incredible. It's incredible what we can accomplish on behalf of our kids. I mean, think about it. For those of you, some of you are GimKit users out there. I'll tell you what. If you don't know what GimKit is, here's how I describe GimKit. Imagine Kahoot and Quizlet had a baby, and then that baby took steroids. Here's the thing: teachers will see it for the first time. It'll work beautifully. They'll get, yes, Jill, they'll get so excited about it. They'll get so excited about it. But again, that moment is responsible for the death of more great teaching and learning than any other since the dawn of the one-room schoolhouse. Why? Because here's what's happening. Our teacher friends will get excited about a new tool that they've never seen before. They'll watch it, and it will lead to this question: "Ooh, that's exciting. What am I going to do with insert tech tool here tomorrow?" Bam. That's the moment right there. That's the moment that's responsible for the death of more great teaching and learning than any other since the dawn of the one-room schoolhouse. Why? Because every initiative that's in place in our schools or in our districts, any hope that we're dialed into rigorous and relevant learning outcomes on behalf of our kids, any hope that we're using tech tools not to replace great instruction, but to support great teaching to make it more effective and efficient than it's ever been before, gone. In that moment, we find ourselves in a place where technology is guiding every single thing that happens in our classrooms. And that was never the mission and vision for blended and personalized instruction. That was never the mission and vision. The mission and vision for blended learning and the mission and vision for personalized learning was never that great teachers were supposed to stand in service to technology. It was always that technology was supposed to stand in service to great teaching, which is why we're here today, to talk about how these great technological tools can stand in service to our teachers to help them be more effective and efficient than they've ever been before. But in order to do that, we all have to come to consensus on something, and we all have to be reminded of something very, very simple and very, very fundamental to the personalized learning movement. We have to be reminded that learning is king and growth is queen and cool is the court jester. And the jester is technology, and the jester has value. The jester has so much value, but don't put the jester in charge of the kingdom. And that's what's happening in too many schools across the country. And it's why we're here today. And it's why we're having conversation about what authentic personalization needs to look like. Because I'll tell you what, like, let me open up and let you look inside the brain of a teacher for just a moment. For so many teachers, for so many classroom teachers, the biggest fear about the arrival of technology is that the arrival of technology represents a departure of everything they love about teaching and learning. And what I want to make sure that we understand is that the arrival of technology and the arrival of personalized instruction does not represent the departure of everything that we love about teaching and learning. It represents an opportunity to help us be more effective and efficient with kids than we've ever been before, an opportunity to make sure that we're engaging kids, not just with the teacher and with the content, but with one another in meaningful ways, to make the work that we do more impactful than it's ever been in the history of education. But in order to do that, we have to acknowledge that our system is not broken beyond repair. We have to acknowledge that our teachers are not broken beyond repair. And we have to be mindful that learning is king and growth is queen and cool is the court jester and the jester is technology. But please, my friends, I'm begging you, don't let your colleagues, don't let yourself put the jester in charge of the kingdom. Let's put great teaching back in its rightful place in the personalized learning equation. And let's make sure our tools support great teaching to make them more effective and efficient than it's ever been before. Everyone do me a favor and take a deep breath in and let it out. And let me pause right here for just a moment. Let me pause right here for a moment and just say thank you before I leave and before I take off. I appreciate all your comments. I'm watching them scroll through the feed. And let me just say this. Again, I want to say thank you. Here we are in the middle of a weekday, in the middle of an already busy time, and you're here devoting time and energy and effort on behalf of our children. And I'll tell you this. I want you to know that I will continue to advocate for the amazing work that educators do across this country. I will continue to spread the message that I don't believe that education is broken. I don't believe that our teachers are broken. And if anyone needs proof of that, if anyone never needed proof that education is not broken, all they had to do is look at what happened during global pandemic. Think about it. When things got just about as bad as they could possibly get, look at where people in our communities turned to for help. Look where they lined up. It was outside of our nation's schools to make sure that their children were fed physically, mentally, socially, emotionally, and academically. And I can't thank you enough for that. I can't thank our amazing educators around this country enough for that. And so I'll continue to advocate for you. I'll continue to share the message that education is not broken. And I'm going to encourage you to take care of yourselves, take care of one another. Please, I'm begging you, don't light yourselves on fire to keep everyone else warm. Let's make sure that we are using the tools that we have at our disposal to be more effective and efficient than we've ever been. My name is Weston Kieschnick. Thank you so much. Anthony, thank you so much for the invite. I'm going to head back to the gym, go get a workout in, and I'll see you there, my friend. Awkward Zoom waves for everyone. Thanks so much. Go forth, be bold, be well. Thanks for having me, everyone.
Okay, I'm still doing my workout right here. Thank you so much, Wes. We really appreciate your keynote this morning, reminding us that education is not broken and encouraging us all to embrace a culture of and. If you're interested in continuing these conversations, you can certainly pick up Wes' new book, Breaking Bold, or join Education Elements in small group conversations. We're holding a series of 4 conversations planned for you, and you can join any one of these, invite a colleague. You can learn more at our website or at educationelements.com/expert-convos. That's /expert-convos. Let's take a moment to hear from teachers who are personalizing learning. Again, we invite you to continue the conversation in the chat as you're watching. Feel free to leave comments, and let's go ahead and take a look now.
It's important to me that every student is celebrated in my classroom, and personalized learning gives us the tools to do that.
Personalized learning has been so great because it's given all of our students an opportunity to feel special.
I believe PL helps my classroom be more equitable because it provides opportunities for all students to meet their goals.
It's no longer everybody gets the same thing, everybody needs the same thing. We are working to provide each and every student with exactly what they need to be successful.
It's a beautiful thing to see how personalized learning has transformed. It has met our needs, no matter how different they are, every year.
I think it's the bread and butter in terms of deep learning and students making meaning independent of me.
Trying to engage the students in a more fluid environment. The number one way to do that is finding a way to tie the content back to their own personal beliefs and their everyday life.
Personalized learning is the way that we are going to reach gaps, motivate students, and create a better future.
All right, we're so thankful for the teachers who open their rooms and in the many ways that they are representatives of so many other dedicated and thoughtful educators. So thank you. We're going to keep the conversation going with a panel of experts. Again, a reminder to join the conversation by adding your thoughts and questions in the chat stream. as we're going through the panel. We may pull some of your questions in and some of your thoughts in, so please add them. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kristen Howell of Education Elements, who will introduce and host our panel.
It's not a day doing something virtually if you are speaking while muted. I'm so sorry about that. Ron and Michelle are here with us today. I'm so just humbled to be in their virtual presence. And for those of you at home and working from home in your space, let me give you a quick sense of the incredible feats and contributions of our panels today before we dive in. So I know Ron as an incredible poet, and the founder of Tripod Education Services, who are now our partners at Education Elements. He has a long and celebrated career, starting with a focus on economic and community development at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and really shifting to focus primarily on education, youth development. I could go on and on. Please read his bio. He's an author, scholar, educator, poet, and father. Ron, so happy to have you here with us today.
Good to be here.
And Michelle is currently the CEO of Achievement Network, or ANET, where she's held many roles over the last decade, from Chief of Schools and System Services, Chief of Staff, and many others. Prior to ANET, Michelle led Think Math across California and DC. She held a managing role at TNTP and Teach for America, and she started her career in DC as a math teacher. Michelle, it's so amazing to have you here with us today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So the impetus behind this whole event, and really behind us doing this mini overhaul or refresh of our Core 4 framework and personalized learning methodology, were the learnings that emerged for us over the last 18 months or so, kind of the collective experience of COVID. And the principles that you'll see on the screen here are really at the core of how our approach and philosophy around personalized learning has evolved and progressed. And although COVID provided a strong impetus, it's really been the last 10 years of our work across the country in schools and classrooms that has solidified the importance and centrality of these principles for really impacting change at scale, and especially for those students at the margin. So you'll see student-centered design, nurturing learning environments, equity-focused and data-informed. And this is where we'll spend our time really digging in today with our incredible panelists. So let's dive in. So for both of you, this question, in the same way that over the last 18 months or so, these principles have really emerged to us as the most essential considerations for our schools and systems. I'm really curious what has emerged for you both. How has your thinking evolved, or maybe what's been validated or affirmed as the result of the last 18 months? And Ron, can you start for us?
Sure. I think what I have noticed most over the past 18 months is the degree to which educators have stepped up and stepped out and taken leadership roles, not just for the narrowly conceived academic mission, but also for community, the degree to which folks have been trying to make sure the kids got fed, and that the connections that needed to be made in the neighborhood around the school have been made. The other thing that I'm not sure I've seen that much, but I've been thinking a lot about is I host a 5-day workshop, or at least for about 9 years, I hosted a 5-day workshop on closing the achievement gap at the Ed School at Harvard. And I would always put out a survey beforehand with about 24 statements, and people could check the relative importance of each statement on as an answer to the question, why hasn't your school made even more progress in raising achievement and narrowing achievement gaps? And the number one answer every year was people are overwhelmed by the complexity of the challenge. Mm. And things have never been more complex as challenges than they have been for the past year. And seeing the way that leaders have stepped up to bring some clarity, to try to reduce the level of complexity has been important. My colleague Susan Moore Johnson at the Ed School has done a study of some of a variation across schools and how well they coped with the COVID challenge. And what she found was that the schools that already had a really strong professional community among the adults in the building coped more effectively. They were able to mobilize more quickly and more effectively to address these challenges. And so the importance of leadership and the importance of a coherent frame of reference and a sense of collective endeavor for schools just came to the fore during that period, because that capacity was so important to help deal with the crisis that folks had not anticipated. So I'll stop with that. But the notion of the critical importance of leadership to deal with crises has been really notable.
Yeah, Ron, I appreciate your frame and orientation in terms of what we've been seeing during this past 18 months. One launch point that I think is important to start with is the past 18 months have not just been all of us trying our best to survive the global health pandemic, but also what we call here at ANET the twin pandemics, also the racial reckoning that's been happening across the country, and that our students and our community have also been having to grapple with and deal with. And thinking intentionally about, how do we support children? How do we support adults? How do we support communities through surviving the twin pandemics and both challenges? So I think one thing that has been affirmed, and I always tell people the best lessons I ever learned in life happened the year I was told to teach an all-girls middle school math classroom. I learned a lot about myself, I learned a lot about math, but I learned a lot about the connection between head and heart that is really essential for every student to thrive. That when we are teaching or engaging them, it is not just about the academics, but that it's about understanding and ensuring that they are seen fully in their classrooms, that they feel that they are able to bring their best selves to the work. And that felt really affirmed this past year as I've been watching school leaders and teachers really reach into the humanity of their students, to acknowledge that school was not normal, to acknowledge that there was this, sense of loss, that I'm not talking about learning loss, I'm talking about social loss that some students were experiencing. And how do you authentically address that, see it, and support students through that moment? And lastly, I would say, I think we don't talk about it enough, but the same thing has been happening for all the adults in our building, right? That they too, I feel Zoom fatigue, right? I'm like, this is actually an exciting webinar, but the number of times we're sitting in these two-dimensional ways of engaging. And I think about how hard that has been on the adults, how hard that has been on the students, and it just affirms how central community is to the learning experience. It's not just, turning the pages of a textbook, but who turns that alongside you, how they see you, how they respect you, and how they engage you in the learning process.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm hearing just the echoes of community, of the importance of coming together, of leadership, and all of the things that were just doubled down on and affirmed throughout COVID. And thinking about the lens of equity, Michelle, you really mentioned it really about that dual pandemic.
Yeah.
For us and what has emerged kind of in this refresh is equity is more important than ever. And it's more urgent than ever. And we know that there's some very big challenges ahead of us, but I'd love to know from you all, kind of amidst that urgency, a lot of noise out there right now related to equity and how we teach equity and how equity shows up in our schools. What do you think districts and schools need to be focused on right now? Ron, you want to start for us?
Sure. A minute ago, you said teach equity. And when you said that, I thought live equity.
Right? Yeah.
Right. It's both. I mean, you have to raise people's consciousness about what we mean by equity and the ways to live it out. But it's really a matter of, and again, you have to do it on purpose. It doesn't happen by accident, but developing a culture in a community where everybody is seen. I'm reminding, as I say that, about, the child who's not a troublemaker, who's quiet, who never bothers anybody, but who's still struggling academically, may not get the attention that they warrant. Or even the teacher who's quiet and never says anything, but maybe struggling as a teacher, because we tend to oil the squeaky wheel, so to speak. And so I think the discourse over the past year, I think, has raised all of our consciousness about equity issues, partly because of the racial reckoning, but the racial reckoning, I think, has broadened out to get us to focus more on our collective humanity and our shared responsibility to attend to every segment of our school community. I'm doing a project now with a school system that's looking at parent engagement and trying to understand why parents are not more engaged, why they don't respond more quickly when the schools reach out. And so we've done a bunch of interviews with parents. And one of the most interesting moments in those interviews, and other people are doing them, but I'm hearing the report on them, is there's a time where they ask, what would you like the educators, the schools, the teachers, the principals to know about you that they don't know? What would you like them to know about you that they don't know? And over, it's, I want them to know that I really care. I want them to know that I'm not one of those parents who don't care and are not involved in the stereotypical image. I don't fit that stereotype, right? And so maybe very few people fit that stereotype. And even they say those parents, you look to say, well, there aren't many of those parents. But helping people to feel respected, helping folks to know that they are not being stereotyped, to know that their expertise, even their expertise about their own child, is understood and respected and valued and invited into the conversation. So now the shift has started to conversation is now, how do we give everybody an opportunity to feel trusted and valued and invited to be involved. And we see everybody, I mean literally everybody in the school community, every segment, every stakeholder group. So the janitors and the lunchroom workers and the parents from all backgrounds and the kids from all achievement levels. And that's not totally easy to do, but it's a challenge. And Wes was talking about the use of technology. And so we're starting to think about, well, how can technology help us to cultivate the kind of social system that we want? We want sort of a socio-technological system that helps us to get it right without going too far in either direction.
Yeah. I love sort of the emphasis on sort of empathy there and really seeing people for who they are, seeing the whole self, and understanding that everyone has, comes from a place of love and caring, and really bringing that to the center rather than making assumptions about, someone who's not showing up for different ways. Michelle, I'm curious for you, what are you really thinking that leaders, teachers around the country should be focused on?
Well, first I want to say something, particularly to this audience and the nature of this conversation. You cannot do personalized learning work if you are not doing equity work. I'm going to say that again because I want you to really internalize and understand what I mean here. You cannot effectively do personalized learning work if you refuse or ignore or not attempting to do equity work. And that is important to acknowledge, because what do we all know about personalized learning, right? It's about ensuring that students are seen for their individual brilliance, that they are able to engage in their own learning pathways, and that we are authentically creating learning experiences that are tailored for them. But if you don't see the child across the room, particularly when there's a line of difference between you and them, how can you personalize for them? Equity work is about ensuring every child gets what they need, ensuring that every child is fully seen. And so this is one element that we've been talking a lot about to a lot of our partners about, that these are not separate or divorced ideas. They actually enhance each other. And there's not, especially given what has been happening in our country and the ways everything is more politicized and divided, I appreciated that we don't need to be this or that educators. We are both and educators, right? And so acknowledging and understanding that equity work and personalized learning work, they work together. They support each other and they're in service of our students. And I've been thinking a lot when it comes to equity and some of the shortcomings I've had in my own education past. I've done a lot career-wise to help people understand the what of teaching, to really ensure, particularly in math, which is where I was a teacher, to deeply understand the standards, to deeply understand what good math instruction looked like, to deeply understand the learning progression in math. I spent so much of my time going around the country talking about how to do great math instruction. And so the what of teaching. I had done a lot of work on the how of teaching, how to have a great lesson, how to do it in a personalized way, how to have, the I do, we do, you do, how to launch a fantastic lesson. And we have all been insufficient to acknowledge the last component of that triangle, which is the who of teaching. And really ensuring that we understand the learner and the fullness of who they are, not understand them. I think sometimes I hear people talking about personalized learning and they lose the dignity of a student by putting them to the number. This is one of my bubble kids. Please never say that around me because I will leave the room, right? Or this is one of my struggling readers. That's not who that student is. This is a student who might have a heritage language that's not English. This is a student who has a rich background, who has passions and things that they're excited about. This is a student who's felt deeply empowered by their learning system so far, or have felt disenfranchised and disempowered by the learning system thus far. And until we understand that we have to see children fully, we won't be able to design lessons that authentically support them. And I think that also goes to conversations that are happening right now in the space around social emotional learning versus academic development. And again, that or thinking, right? I'm either a social emotional learning teacher. I'm going to ensure that my students have these social emotional learning skills. Or I've heard teachers say, I don't really care about that fluff. I'm just an academic development teacher. I want to make them college ready. Okay, what? To survive college, let me tell you one thing I learned. You got to have some perseverance. You have to have some agency. You have to have efficacy. And it's actually about how that social emotional work supports the academic development. Those are and complementary ideas. And so when I think about equity, when I think about this moment in time, I think so much about how we have to honor that a child is multidimensional. Their social emotional part of their life and their academic part of their life do not show up to you in two separate bodies. They are one body, one human in front of your classroom. And it's about how we authentically see them, how we respect them, how we teach with dignity and compassion as the primary anchors for instructional methods that we use.
Whew, I got goosebumps over here. I just love so much of what you're saying, and just that whole child approach as the core of what personalized learning is that you've got to see the person to personalized learning, putting the person back into personalized learning. That's what this is all about. So I'm curious, switching gears a little bit, Ron, your life work really, and Michelle, all the work that ANET does is really about data to give us a better sense and a better understanding of what we're seeing, of what's happening in classrooms, of student learning, to impact change. So I'm curious right now, again, in this current climate, there's so many challenges districts are facing, classrooms, teachers are facing, and it feels like there's a lot of kind of pessimism and deficit thinking about learning loss, unfinished learning, all those gaps in learning that exist. So I want to flip it to the positive side and talk about what data right now is giving you hope or excitement for the future, a source of data or anything that you're seeing that's really giving you some hope. And Michelle, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I love some data. I will say data is not just numerical, right? Data is qualitative, it's experiential. So when I say data, I'm talking about the multifaceted elements of data that we see. And so one, I will say the biggest data point that gives me hope is actually a data point we saw right before the pandemic. And there was a study that was done by TNTP that looked at I think the publication was called the opportunity myth. Mm-hmm. And there was a data point there that I actually have on a Post-it note sitting above my monitor right here. And it says that teacher belief is the biggest differentiator for student outcomes. And that when teachers believe students can, in a given school year, they saw 4.5 more months of learning. And that to me was so profound, right? That it wasn't about what materials, what platform, what technology, but the biggest differentiator is the belief that teachers have about the students that sit in front of them. And that makes me inspired because it also tells me right now, as we get swept up in conversation about learning loss and deficit thinking, that I don't have to do anything about changing my students. I actually have to do the work on changing the mindset of the adults. And if we can operate and enter this year in a spirit of belief, and if we can enter this year not saying, here are all the things our students don't have, but here is the brilliance that they already come with, and my role is to facilitate and ignite that brilliance, then half the race is already won for us before we've even started. And I think that's so important. As you know, at ANET, we do a lot of our work with school leaders and coaching and supporting them. And so most of our work is actually, how are our leaders ensuring that that mindset and that orientation is true for their teachers and for all students, right? That they're looking and thinking about all students and believing that they can. We also have been seeing a lot of inspiring and motivating data when it comes to teachers and leaders. I actually think in the keynote, this was mentioned briefly, and we've seen it in our own study. We have a partnership with USC, and they've been studying 4 or 5 districts that we've been working with across the country for the past few years. And there are districts who've created those strong professional learning communities, who've kind of oriented to what's the role our materials should be having, what's the role that teachers should be having with each other, and have been studying their mindsets and beliefs before the pandemic. And then we surveyed it during this moment in time. And the thing that inspired me so much is seeing so many of our districts who put those strong foundations in place, who situated the mindset work intentionally, who situated an understanding of the art of teaching and the science of teaching. How do materials fit into your ecosystem? How does our professional learning community sit in your ecosystem? That in many ways, their work became a bit pandemic proof, right? Like they didn't actually get worse in their own feelings about students during the crisis. They didn't get worse in their own feelings about themselves. And in some cases, those districts who were strong to start got better. They actually felt like more clear on what they needed to do, more clear on their charge as a community because they had set those foundations in place. And so I think a lot of the data around the role we as adults can play and our mindsets, our habits, and our beliefs about students being game-changing for what happens in classrooms is inspiring, because that's on us. Like we can make those changes and adjustments, and we can actually not be in a passive stance about what is happening, but actually be in a positive and in control stance of like, if we actually believe, we can actually support our students to achieve.
Yeah, Ron, given all of the work that you've done over, your entire career, the MET project, et cetera, it's all about data. And I love, Michelle, just the thinking around mindsets and beliefs around what students can do. Ron, curious from your perspective.
Yeah, I want to start with what Michelle just said. One of the epiphanies for me, actually quite a while ago now, happened when I was tracking an effort that took Marva Collins' ideas down into Oklahoma. Some of you know Marva Collins was a fantastic master teacher in Chicago who did things with kids from public housing and inner city and communities that people thought you couldn't do with those kids. And so they let me come to one of the summer institutes, and I did some survey work. And bottom line, the conclusion that came out of that work was that the low teacher expectations and the teacher beliefs weren't really about the kids. It was about the teacher's belief in their own ability to be successful with the children they were with. And so when we talk about changing teachers' beliefs, it's really changing a teacher's beliefs about their own potential to be effective with the children they're working with, which comes through doing a lot of things that Michelle was talking about. But it's not just about preaching at adults that all children can learn. Because what we found was that the teachers granted, to a very high degree, they granted the plausibility of that proposition, that somebody could raise their own students to a much higher level. But when asked to rank the reasons why they had not made more progress, they could rank. We had time, supervisory support, freedom to do the things the way you want in the classroom, your own knowledge and effort, or something like that. The number one reason they listed was time, but the number two reason why their kids hadn't risen a lot higher, weren't doing a lot better, was their own knowledge. And so it was their belief in themselves, their belief in their own efficacy. It wasn't that they were assuming that the kids were intrinsically deficient in some ways. They granted the plausibilities kids can do better. But if this is their teacher, I don't know how to do that. That's where they were. And so it's partly just through giving people more effective ways to do things. Now, the problem was that just telling them to do something that might be more effective, they're not necessarily going to do it because they don't think it's going to work, right? And so there was a process of accountability where people kept, well, have you tried it yet? Have you done it yet? And they got tired. Some of them just, look, I'm gonna start doing these things just so I'll show them it won't work in my class. And lo and behold, it did work in their classes. And so you had to get people to do things that they didn't think were going to work, but they have to be under some pressure to do it. They have to be harassed sometimes into doing it. And when they finally do it, and they do it pretty much the way it was suggested they should do it, lo and behold, it works. And then they do it again, and it works again. And the outcome is high teacher expectations, but it was the teacher practice that led to the high teacher expectations, and not the high expectations that led to the practice. You end up with high belief and high expectations, but there's got to be almost a seeing is believing experience that they go through, partly because of their own practice. Now, I will say that the other thing we learned through some of the work was that we have some school districts that have done our tripod surveys year after year. Some of you know we have what we call the 7 C's of effective instruction that I can go through more detail if we have time. But there were teachers who, beginning maybe five or so years before we did the project, were substantially below average on captivate and care and consolidate and clarify and all the things that we measure. And then we went back, we identified those who were below average, and then 4 or 5 years later were way above average, and went and interviewed them. And the punchline that came out for me was the ones that had improved a lot, and this isn't how their students rated the quality of their experience in the classroom, they had decided that they wanted to improve. And we didn't, that wasn't in our forced choice questions. We hadn't anticipated that was going to be a conclusion that dropped out. But the ones that improved a lot, at some moment they decided, I'm not doing my best. I'm not doing right by these kids. I got to do better. And at that point, they started taking the student feedback more seriously. They started looking for feedback from their peers. They started visiting other people's classrooms, and they got better. And what we didn't study was, what was that moment? What is it that triggers this teacher to decide, I'm going to get better? Because if they make that decision and all the tools that we're giving them that can be used that way, they start to use them more seriously, and they do get better. So I could talk. Well, I'll stop running on. Give it.
No, please. I mean, there's so much wisdom and great nuggets. I'm learning so much. I'm sure everyone tuning in from all over the world is learning so much from you both too. So thinking about, I don't have to convince either of you. Both of you sort of have nodded to this. How resilient and brilliant our learners are. And how different the world in which our learners, the world's going to be that they're graduating into. It continues to shift, continues to change. So much that wasn't true 10 years ago is true now. But however, it still feels like adults in the system, make most of the decisions related to systems change. And thinking about the student-centered design, and I want to know just from you all, what role do you see students playing as the designers as we look to the future? Or what role could they play?
Michelle, you want to go first?
Yeah, I don't mind. Well, I think this is really important and a question, even us as a support organization, we've been asking. So a lot of people know ANET as through our assessments that we provide. And we've been thinking about and grappling with how to have students be able to weigh in more in our work and our design to support their own thinking about what does it look like to measure if they've achieved and if they've been successful. And I think one thing that is really interesting that I've noticed over the years is it is easier oftentimes when we're talking about upper grades for people to imagine what this looks like, right? I've seen several examples of schools or districts or communities that have student-led panels, or students who sit on the board, or students who lead committees that are part of the decision-making around school about just different elements of schooling. And I think we oftentimes lead from the assumption that our younger children and our younger babies aren't able to share how they are learning and how they are experiencing the work. And I think that the way that we achieve that is multidimensional. I think it's both by being clear and concrete in how we engage and ask them about their learning experience. Sometimes when I'm observing a classroom, I will ask a child, even if they're in kindergarten, were you set up for success for today's lesson? The answers you get from a 5-year-old, they're like, no, I've never seen this type of thing ever before in my life. And then asking a follow-up question of, well, what could the teacher have done to set you up? Or is this lesson engaging to you? What could have changed to be engaging? And it's fascinating to watch children, one, ponder the question because very little have they ever been asked it, and then be able to share like, oh, well, this is kind of boring. Or actually, I wish we had more things to do with our hands here. And that's so important. And at early ages, students are able to say like what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy, what's helpful, what's not helpful. But we too quickly rob them of their voice and wait for them to hit an age where we believe that they should have agency. And then we wait till they're teachers and then rob them of their agency again. And we actually have to just honor that every person, and I think both Ron and I have said these same themes, every person wants to be seen, heard, and respected. Even when you are 4 and 5 years old, even when you are 45 years into your career, right? You want to be seen, heard, and respected. And so how do you ensure that you're designing opportunities, big and small, for that? And my dog Roosevelt has heard Amazon is here.
He just likes what you're saying a lot. He's given you a big. Yeah.
I too deserve to be seen, heard, and respected.
Exactly. And we hear you, Roosevelt.
There's probably a story about why the dog's name is Roosevelt. It's an interesting name for a dog. So I guess a couple things. One is that we need to be careful when we reach out to have student voice and have students help with decision making, not to abdicate our responsibility as adults to put structure on that process. One of the C's in our 7 C's is confer. And it has to do with eliciting students' point of view, reaching out, welcoming their perspectives. And one of the surprising findings from our data is that when you hold constant all the other C's, higher levels of confer becomes what we call an agency damper. It reduces student initiative and engagement. And I think that part of the reason is that if you hold constant everything else, it's not being used in service to captivation and clarify and consolidation and challenge. It's just idle conversation. It's just unstructured invitation for student engagement. And that actually had the opposite effect from what we want. We do want to cultivate agency, but we have to do it carefully. The other thing I want to mention about student voice and student engagement is it is important to have students have a story they can tell themselves about. Why am I learning this? What's the purpose? We have, I put out a book 2 years ago called The Formula, Unlocking the Secrets to Raising Highly Successful Children. So let me plug the book. The Formula, Unlocking the Secrets to Raising Highly Successful Children is co-authored with a journalist, my colleague, Tatcha Robertson. And in that book, we people say, well, what do you mean by success? And we say, what we mean by success is a fully realized human being. Not a lot of money necessarily, whatever it is that human being wants to do with their life, they've been able to do it. They've been able to pull it off. And we have a little equation in the book that says smarts plus purpose plus agency equals fully realized. Okay, you got to have the intellectual wherewithal to do what you want to do, but you also got to have something you want to do, some purpose, some aim. And then if you have purpose, you also need to have agency. And that's the get up and go, to take the initiative to actually do what you need to do to achieve that purpose. The simplest notion of what agency is that I find useful myself, even just as a handle, because we throw that word around. What are we really talking about? It's the opposite of helplessness. Agency is the opposite of helplessness. Somebody who feels helpless has some stuff they want to do, but they're just dead in the water because they just don't think they can do it. They just don't try. So we want to have that propensity, that sense of agency. If I decide I want to do something and I really think it's feasible, then I'm going to go after it. I'm going to get it done. Okay. So how do we cultivate agency? How do we cultivate purpose? Okay. There are various ways of interacting with children to give them a sense of what the menu of possibilities is. I mean, one of the roles in the formula is the revealer. The revealer exposes kids to their options, all the different things to be interested in, types of things to grow up to be, and so on and so forth. And then You help give kids the strategies that they would need to pursue the various possibilities that might be attractive to them, right? And that's where they find their purpose. And then if they've got the strategy, then they also say, hey, I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you encourage, and you do all the good stuff that we think about when we think about encouragement, and that helps to cultivate agency. And when kids do something successfully, you remind them, hey, look what you did. You didn't give up. You kept doing that, and it turned out okay. And they learn that what that feels like, and they do it over and over again. So the cultivation of purpose, the cultivation of agency, but in a structured way that doesn't leave kids just feeling, oh, you just wasted my time. It's just a idle conversation. Because it really was a surprise when out of the analysis popped this result that confer was often an agency damper instead of an agency booster. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I love the nod to just the intentionality. So, the small ways, Michelle, you talked about, you can just ask kids in these small ways every day. You can make this part of your practice, but you have to be intentional about the why. What is it going to result in, and how is it going to impact then the way that you're teaching, the way that your system's operating, et cetera. So I love those perspectives. So in our final moments here, I'm going to ask you a question. You're probably going to be like, why are you asking me this? This is so too hard. But I have to ask, just because, you both come with such a wealth of wisdom, knowledge, and expertise, and great perspectives. And then we're working with, district and school administrators every day who are facing a lot. So if you were, just put back to empathy, put yourself in their shoes, and what advice or guidance would you give a school or a district leader at this moment in time?
I don't mind starting.
Yeah, jump in.
And I'm going to be selfish. I have three things I would anchor on. But they all are in the spirit of care. Mm-hmm. So the first is, and I want every school leader, superintendent, district professional out there to really hear me when I say the first two. Take care of yourself right now. Mm-hmm. The challenge in front of you is different than you've ever seen before. The burden that you might be feeling, the weight that might be on your shoulders, the responsibility to do right by the children and the families that trust you every day is high. Take care of yourself. That is so important right now, and we're not doing it enough. I talk to leaders all the time who are barely keeping their heads above water and trying their best to stay afloat in this moment, but not realizing that self-care is a part of that journey. And number two, to ensure that the adults in your building are doing the same. The number of times we did a survey in the middle of the pandemic, and we asked teachers how much they feel like they are getting social emotional support through this moment. I think we had, of all the teachers, maybe one said that they had experienced something that acknowledged that. And I was so struck, Ron, when you said by the survey, people feel like the complexity of the challenge is so much. And the complexity of the challenge is even greater right now. And so as leaders, it is your responsibility to model self-care and to carve it out for your team, and to create opportunities to check in, and not just how did that lesson go today, but how are you doing? If we want our teachers to see the humanity and put the person back in personalized learning for their students, we have to model seeing their humanity in this moment. And that is really important. And it's not happening enough. And we've got to do it. And if you think you've done it, do it again, and do it again, and do it again. And then lastly, if you've taken care of yourself and you're ensuring that the adults are taking care of themselves, that will create a culture where you're also building those habits for students, where you're creating time and space for them to reflect on what's going on, and that you don't shy away because you're so pressed to get through a pacing guide, but you're actually thinking deeply and intentionally about how they are experiencing the learning environment, how they are seeing themselves and what's going on in their classrooms, and how they are feeling set up for success as full beings. And I just think that that's what we have to focus on right now, the humanity of each other, the dignity of every person in the ecosystem, and that means the parents, the students, every person, every player, and it starts with ourselves. If we do not do that, this year will only get harder for us.
Yeah, I agree totally with Michelle. And I want to say one way to take care of folks is, and I also love that she called out the complexity issue. One way to help take care of folks is to try to the degree that you can to decomplexify the environment. And one way to think about that is we want to be clear about what our priorities are, and we can't do everything at the same time. There are a few things that are most important to do. If you can help identify what those things are and to align people around those things, then it can help life to seem a bit more manageable because everybody is overwhelmed at this point. Now, one aspect of that prioritization and decomplexitization, if that's a word, is to align the various initiatives that are going on. I had this conversation a couple of days ago with an educator. Our school leaders, and not just our school building leaders and our district leaders, are so ambitious in this moment. And this harks back even to some of what Wes was saying. They're trying to do a lot of things at the same time, right? And I'm sure Michelle has had this experience. You're working in a school system or in a school trying to help on things, and you find out that there are 4 other consultants in the building that are doing other work that overlaps with yours, and you didn't even know they were there. Okay, and people are resistant to hosting a meeting where you can be in the same room with those other consultants so you can get aligned, so that the teachers and the other people that they're trying to consult to can have a coherent experience, right? Because if you put yourself in the position of the teacher or somebody else who is supposed to be the beneficiary, it's like the Tower of Babel. They got 5 different frameworks coming at them from, all these different places, and basically you got ambitious school leaders. Well, they need one of those and one of those and one of those. They bring it in and everything doesn't fit together in a coherent way.
Yeah.
And so I guess the advice that I would give to anybody who's trying to lead is put yourself in the position of the people you're trying to lead, and think about how all the things you're trying to do are coming at them, and imagine whether it feels coherent or not, and try to do what you can to foster coherence, to help people understand what the connections are. Because you may have a mental map where you see how it all fits together. You see how it's all part of something neat, but you're the only one that's got that map in your head.
Yeah.
And you need to share it. And you need to get other people to check you to be sure that they agree that it aligns the way that you think it does. Because the feeling of uncertainty and being overwhelmed by so many things to manage is part of where the stress comes from, right? And that, I think, is not just during, it was a big issue before the pandemic, and it's probably even a bigger issue now. And the educator I was talking to a couple of days ago, they're in a place where they got principals teaching class right now because they don't have enough teachers, right? And you got that happening at the same time. You got all this other stuff coming at you. So coherence, set some priorities, let people know you kind of got it managed. And I'll just end with real quickly, check yourself on trustworthiness. Am I trustworthy? And there are 4 trust questions that I like to prioritize. Various people have various lists. The first one is, can people trust my motives? Do they really believe I really care about kids? I really care about parents. I really want to make this thing here, as opposed to I'm just here for a paycheck or to get famous or do what I need to do to get promoted to the next job. Okay. The second is, can they trust my competence? Do they believe I know what the hell I'm talking about? And I got to be serious myself. Am I competent? Do I really know what I need to know? Do I have 3 consultants in here and I don't even know what they're doing? Do I know enough about what they're doing that I can hold accountable and be supportive of that? The third, am I dependable? Do people know that when I promise something, I keep my word? And finally, do people perceive me as collegial and respectful? Do they think I'm condescending and overbearing? Or do they think that I'm collegial and respectful and, all that good stuff? So if the answer is no to any of those questions, don't have the right motives, you're not competent, you're not dependable, or you're not respectful and collegial, you're not going to get the cooperation you need from the people that need to work with you, because people don't cooperate with people they don't trust, right? And so be trustworthy, check yourself, consider the possibility you might be wrong, get some other people's feedback on that, and make it coherent. That's the bundle of advice, and I think it's completely compatible with what Michelle said.
Yeah.
And I know we're at time. I just want to slip one thing in, Ron, that you said, that just if everything is a priority, you do not understand the definition of the word.
Yeah, and nothing is a priority if everything is a priority. I love that. Take care of yourself, decomplexify, and really prioritize what's important right now. Thank you both so much. This has been an absolute pleasure joining virtually with you. Again, just humbled to be in your presence. You're both so amazing. And thank you. I hope you stick around for the rest of the programming, and everyone out there, we'll see you back soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, Ron, Kristen, for such a thoughtful and wise and human-centered discussion. As I was scrolling through some of the comments, I'm seeing comments and reflections, including profound, meaningful change occurs the moment you step out of your comfort zone, take care of yourself, take care of your staff, and of course, on the importance of student voice. Thank you again, Michelle and Ron. And of course, hi to Roosevelt. We see and hear you too. Let's go ahead and take a quick video break before hearing from Education Elements team members Katie Camp and Noah Doherty, who will share more about our most significant update to our perspective on personalized learning in 5 years. So let's go ahead and take that quick video break before hearing from Noah and Katie.
Hey everybody, my name is Noah Doherty and I am here with my colleague Katie Camp, and we are thrilled to introduce the new Core 4 Personalizing Learning and to share some of the reasoning, the thinking behind this process, and some of the highlights from our updated approach. So what the two of us are going to talk about, we're going to first start by talking about why personalizing is so important and the conversation about why it can be important to every single one of us. We will reveal the new Core 4, our evolution of thinking around the Core 4, and then share some highlights about this approach. So when we work with educators to personalize learning, one of the very first conversations we have with people is we have a conversation about why personalized learning is important to them individually. We think that personalized learning is a shift larger than the adoption of a program or a curriculum. It's really a shift towards something that is very student-centered. And when we have a shift that big, we want to make sure that it's anchored in a really strong reasoning and a really strong why. And so I'm going to model this. I'm going to share personally why personalized learning is so important to me. So before I joined Education Elements, I taught 8th grade students in Washington, D.C. And the very best field trip I ever took kids on was to a ropes course in Maryland, just outside the city. This was the first field trip that we'd ever taken kids on at the beginning of that year. It was meant to be a team building experience for all of our 8th graders. And it was just this perfectly beautiful fall day. Kids were running around. Everyone was having a great time. And one of the things that really struck me about this ropes course was how it started. So after the safety demonstration, kids would all start on this central platform. And there were a bunch of different routes that all came from this central platform. And they were labeled by different colors, kind of like a ski slope almost. And so the green routes were the easiest ones. These were the ones that might involve some crawling. They were the lowest to the forest floor. The blue routes were a little bit higher. They involved some climbing. And then the red route was the hardest. You had to have a lot of upper body strength for it. And what was amazing about it is that kids were each able to choose the route on the ropes course that felt most meaningful and most challenging to them individually. And on the bus ride home, I was really taken by how excited every single student was. Every single student was talking about the challenges they were overcome, they had experienced success. And even though the context of what they did was different, even though everyone chose a different route, they all had a similarly powerful experience because they had all been successful at something. And this experience with this ropes course, it really changed how I thought about what a ropes course could be. I had always thought of a ropes course as something where everyone did the same thing in the same order, one after the other. And what was so incredible about this ropes course is it showed me that kids could actually, or people could take different routes, and that actually because they got to choose the route that was right for them, it actually made the experience more impactful and more powerful for them. And this change in how I began to think about what a ropes course could be was reflected in a change I was thinking about with my classroom. My classroom at that time was very much a place where everyone did the same thing in the same order at the same time. And it really helped push my thinking about what a classroom could be, and the belief that if we provide flexibility, if we provide options, if we allow everyone to be really successful with the challenge that is right for them, that collectively, that's actually a much, much more powerful experience. And so me sharing this, my own personal why for personalized learning, is meant to help sort of provide an example of why I do this work. And by modeling that, I hope that you can think similarly why personalized learning can be such an important thing for you.
Yeah, thanks, Noah, for sharing that. A lot of what you spoke to resonates with me. My classroom very much resembled the classroom on the left as well. For better or for worse, I think that we start teaching the way that we were taught ourselves. And personalized learning really did shift the way that my students felt in my classroom and the interactions and relationships I was able to build with them. So when we talk about what personalized learning is, we really are talking about an instructional approach that empowers students to build ownership of their learning. It's student-centered, and it requires that we as educators are responsive to the needs of our students. So we're making sure they get the instruction they need, when and how they need it. I want to talk to you through a few goals of what personalized learning is. And so the goal really is student ownership. This builds self-awareness in kids, empowers our students to advocate for both themselves and their community, really going back to why is this important to me? How does this impact the people I care about? It develops self-management and also inspires them to become lifelong learners. In addition to the way that we talk about this work is adding the idea of nurturing learning environments as a requirement to be able to personalize learning for your kids. This came through in the panel we just hosted of, you can't personalize for students that you don't know. And this is tied to the SEL framework that CASEL provides of self-awareness, social awareness, and strong relationships. And these are equally important for students and educators as the academic content that you're teaching. So making sure that we really put an emphasis on nurturing learning environments and creating the space where students feel seen, heard, and trusted and appreciated in order to be able to personalize for them. So again, just wanted to call out that the goal of this work is student ownership, and that it requires that we build a nurturing learning environment and space for our students to succeed. And so with that, I wanted to give the mic back to Noah to talk about our updates to the Core 4.
Yeah, so we are really, really excited to share our updated framework. And we actually think that the best way to roll this out is to talk about how our thinking around the Core 4 has evolved over time. So if we go way back to 2014, the very first time we talk about 4 different elements is when we talked about the elements of blended learning, when we began working with schools, there were all of these new powerful digital programs and devices. And the big question that was top of mind for a lot of people was, how am I going to successfully integrate all of this digital content and devices into my classroom? And so we really focused on blended learning, and we really focused on the integration of technology. And the following year, we began to use this term, the Core Four. We wanted to really simplify these practices and mindsets into 4 priorities that everything could really be bucketed into. The more that we worked with educators to help blend learning, the more we realized that blending technology into the classroom wasn't the only goal, right? That we actually needed to be more expansive in our thinking. And so that same year, we began to talk not just about the blended learning Core Four, but the personalized learning Core Four, naming that this work isn't just about the integration of technology into the classroom. What it's really about is how we can use all of these powerful tools to make sure that every single student gets what they need to be successful. And so 2015, we talked about the personalized learning Core Four, and you'll notice that in 2016, all the way to 2017, we added color to it. Our amazing marketing team gave it this really polished look, and the Core Four elements is these 4 kind of petals. This is the framework that has really defined our work for the last 5 years. And so by looking at the evolution of how the Core Four has grown and developed, it helps to provide some context for our new Core Four personalizing learning. And one of the things that our team has been doing over the last couple of months is really taking a step back and thinking about what are the most important components, what's the most important work and mindsets that need to exist when we personalize learning for students. And so this kind of reflection, this personal reflection, thinking about those priorities has really informed our updated framework. Katie?
Yeah, so really excited to share with you what the updated framework is. And so I mentioned that the goal is student ownership. You will see that at the center of the Core Four. You'll see the hand that supports our Core Four and personalized learning is that nurturing learning environment. And we updated some components of the Core Four that we're excited to share with you today. So the Core Four consists of reflection and goal setting. So providing the opportunity for students to reflect on what they're learning and set goals for themselves, and then reflect on their progress towards that goal. So this is one way to make goal setting feel truly meaningful for kids. The next piece is targeted instruction. So at its most actualized, students can articulate what instruction they are receiving and why. Michelle talked about earlier being able to come into a classroom and ask a student, what are you working on? Why is this important to you? And some of the answers that you can receive from kids as young as kindergarten can be really powerful. And so we want to make sure students are receiving the content and the process that is meaningful for them in this space. So this is really just being able to speak to the instruction you're receiving and why it's important. Flexible path and pace is the design of our learning experience. So ensuring kids get what they need when they need it, providing flexibility in how they show learning and the pace at which they access material. And then finally, we added a new component to the Core Four, which is collaboration and creativity. We know that this year and a half plus away from the classroom has had a huge impact on kids. And so being able to harness that social interaction and collaboration with others is extremely important. And so this is about discussing ideas, meaning, and creatively solving problems with others as you move throughout the classroom. So we're really excited to share these updates with you all. I hope that some of these changes resonate with what you're feeling in your classroom and in your school community. We also wanted to share some highlights of what this work will look like in action. So you might be thinking, yeah, the Core Four sounds wonderful. What does this look like in action? How do we implement this in our school? And so one practice that we are prioritizing is the idea of learning walks. And so a learning walk is an opportunity that is non-evaluative to pop into classrooms for a snapshot in time to see where does the Core Four live. So what practices are really strong? Where can we grow? What opportunities for advancement do we have? And so this is something that our Ed Elements consultants come in and build capacity to have schools be able to do this on their own. So this isn't something that we should just do when we have folks visiting from the outside, but instead a practice that can be really impactful to the way that we change our practice. So the way that we kind of harness that data is through a learning walk tool, a data dashboard that shows growth over time. Again, that we know everyone, just like our students, our educators are all starting in different places. And so the goal is to show growth in each area of the Core 4. So we'll be able to see where folks start and how this changes over time. And so we want to make sure that our practice of personalized learning is data informed and that can impact the decisions that we make. We also included ongoing student focus groups. This was also talked about earlier of how can we provide students agency to be the change that they hope to see in the classroom. And one way to do that is to ask students what they like, what they don't like. Do they feel seen, trusted, and heard in their classrooms consistently throughout the year? So we don't want this to feel like something that we do one time and we never revisit it, to Ron's point. Also, what do we do with that data? We've heard what kids want. And now how can we be intentional about the way that we structure and set up our classrooms and let them know that what they shared was heard and can be actualized within our classroom. And the last piece is we are working on a self-paced teacher mini course. And so we want to offer a little bit of that flexibility and path and pace to teachers who want to implement personalized learning. So this is just a place to come for resources, tips, best practices on how to implement personalized learning. And we know that people are stretched for time. So want it to be available in a time and space that makes sense for teachers and educators and a way to model what this could look like in classrooms. And so those are all of the updates that we wanted to share with you all on the Core 4 and our highlights. And really excited just to be with you all here today to share how our perspective has shifted in the last 5 years.
Thanks, Katie and Noah, for that comprehensive overview. We're gonna send out the Core 4 white paper so you can dive into it in detail, and you can certainly come back to our website and take a look at it. If you're interested in learning more and taking a deeper dive, then join us in an upcoming webinar next week about the Core 4. That's next week, October 14th at 8 a.m. Send your colleagues, send your friends. It's been one of our most popular resources that we've ever produced, and we hope that this update promises to have the same impact. And you can learn more about that webinar at educationelements.com. We've heard from leaders, and let's take another moment to hear from some teachers. So we're going to cut over to a video to hear directly from some of our teachers.
I believe PL helps my classroom be more equitable because the model provides opportunities for all students to meet their goals. Now, those goals are going to look very different, but they're all going to be receiving the education and the practice that they need to meet them.
Hi, my name is Angie Lee. I teach second grade dual language at PL Prep in Dallas IC. This is my 7th year teaching. I've taught from 1st to 3rd grade and a little bit of high school, and I've taught here in Dallas, in San Antonio, and in Mexico. I actually learned about personalized learning when I applied to PL Prep. I remember they had a huge banner with their vision, and one of the things that spoke out to me was the phrase education with a one-size-fits-one approach. And as the year started, we had professional development with Education Elements, and we had learning excursions with the PL department in Dallas IC, and we were able to see what personalized learning actually looked like in action. And that was super helpful. I had never had PD that was actually personalized and differentiated for teachers as well. And one of the things that we did was we created our own core values for the school, or our pillars of success. And within that, we developed a pathway for teachers so that whenever you come here and you are working on your professional development, it's gonna look completely different to each teacher, just like it would in the classroom for each student. When I look back from when I was teaching in a more traditional method to now, the biggest change I see in all students, honestly, across the school, is that students are more engaged. They are self-directed because they know where they are at. They know what they need, and they're able to become very independent learners. And that goes across all academic levels. And PL is really important for me right now because I believe that personalized learning is one of the ways where we truly serve our kids, because no matter what they end up doing or where they go, if they're able to know and advocate for themselves, they're gonna, fulfill all of their dreams, hopefully.
It's important to me that every student is celebrated in my classroom, and personalized learning gives us the tools to do that. Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Theriel. I'm a social studies high school teacher at Pathways Academy of Technology and Design in the Hartford Public School District, which is in Connecticut. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my personalized learning journey. So it started when I was asked to attend a series of PD that were given by Education Elements in my district, and then I kept bringing it to my classroom, and every little part that I brought, I loved what it did to my students. I loved what it did to the atmosphere and the climate and the culture, and I loved it so much that I was asked by my district to become we called it student-centered learning, so to become a student-centered lead for the district. So it was my job to help transform my school and not just my classroom. The biggest impact I have seen is in the students themselves. So students have a lot more ownership when it comes to personalized learning because they are choosing the way that they learn, the how that they learn. Students are excited to come to class and excited to get to work because they're doing things that they know that they like. They're still reaching the same standards as everybody else in the classroom, but they're just doing it in a way that works for them personally. Because they're able to choose their multiple pathways, they have to create goals that they're going to reach in each of those pathways. And they also have to do self-assessment, right? Am I reaching this goal? Am I in this classroom doing what I need to do to reach this goal? This is my goal getter corner. So students will keep track of their own goals that we set. There's each of these for my classes. I have 6 classes out of the 8 periods that I teach, so there's 6 boards. Each student gets an individual line. We write their goals at the top, the standards that we want to reach, and we use their ID number versus their name, so they don't know who the other people are, and they get to check off when they are done with that standard, when they have completed their goal for the unit. And that standard, that goal and how they reach it is different for each of my students. I've seen growth in my students. I have seen a stronger community, right? Because part of personalized learning is also being able to collaborate with other students in the classroom, which is a skill that they'll need outside of this classroom, a skill that they'll need outside of this building. The biggest thing that I have seen is the reflection piece. Students are able to talk about what they're learning. They're able to bring it to other places. And to me, that's one of the biggest things, because I want them to leave here not knowing stuff that they can look up on Google, right? I want them to leave here knowing the skills to be able to sift through information, the skills to make them better workers out in the workforce, and the skills that are going to make them stand out and be successful when they get to life after high school. It's also about relationships, right? The kids come in here the first week of school, I don't know them at all, and it's very important to build that relationship first so you know where each student is coming from. You're using the data that you collect, the data from the last year that you have, to be able to personalize plans for them, to know who needs one-on-one instruction, who can be a little bit more independent, and that is the information you need in order to make personalized learning successful. Personalized learning, this journey that I've been on for 4 years, this is going into my 5th year of doing it, has radically changed my teaching for the better.
Personalized learning is important to me as a teacher because I think it's the bread and butter in terms of deep learning and students making meaning independent of me. I am not the focal point, they are. Carrie Ritigliano, a teacher at Mayfield High School. This is my 21st year at Mayfield High School. I'm an English teacher by trade. I'm also an academic coach. And this is my colleague, Mr. Matt Mahalik.
And this is my 5th year at Mayfield High School, and I'm a social studies teacher and just really excited to talk about all this today.
A couple of years ago, I started to see more and more in my students a lack of engagement, and we had an opportunity as a school to visit other schools, other programs that had a personalized approach, and I was incredibly inspired in terms of what I saw. Seeing students in a personalized learning experience, growing their autonomy, being independent and being engaged, and setting schedules, optimizing their time and prioritizing their routine.
One of the big high points for me in terms of my personalized learning journey on a day-to-day basis would be the conferencing that I get to do with my students in a one-on-one setting. For example, I can go over students' extended response problems in AP Government. I can go over their FRQs. We can talk about their work and their projects. And that has been really powerful to be able to get that one-on-one time, especially for students that might not be as socially active as others. And those kids that do better in the one-on-one setting with the teacher than maybe in front of a whole group that maybe don't feel comfortable asking a question in front of the whole class. It's been really great to see those students kind of open up and ask a lot of questions during our one-on-one conferencing.
In addition to that, one of the high points, a lot of kids say, just tell me what to do. But over the course of the option experience, they grow into independent, strong-minded students, both academically and also in terms of their social, emotional health. So those are high points, seeing that growth. And yes, you see that, you observe that in a traditional classroom, but there is greater opportunity in a personalized learning space to be independent and to see that growth.
Encouraging ownership for my students in the classroom is a huge part of what we do every day in the option. I would say one of the biggest ways we do this is by making the students advocate for themselves on a daily basis with their teachers. The one thing that I would describe it as, it's really like a college student union, and students are working on assignments that they know they have to get done through our online Schoology platforms, and then they come to their teachers with questions and information that they would like to know. So we've really flipped the model of teachers going to students with information to now students coming to teachers with questions about the information that we posted for them on our online learning platform. So the students advocating for themselves, we think that's huge, not only for developing their skills, but also preparing them for the next level in terms of their college education. And that's going to be a huge skill for them to learn to be successful at the next level.
In addition to that, because we bring into the option experience, the personalized learning experience, the coaching model, looking at habits of mind, looking at developing time management, students creating their day so that they can schedule a routine that allows them to finish their practice or their summative assignments within the course of the day. They are developing a far more balanced life, and outside of the classroom, they're not waylaid by all of this work, and they're getting better sleep, they're more alert, and so they're far more balanced in terms of their social and emotional well-being.
For me, my personalized learning approach in the classroom comes down to allowing students to show what they know in a variety of ways. We don't just do traditional summative assessments here in the option program at Mayfield. We do a lot of project-based learning assignments, a lot of PBLs in my social studies classroom. For example, students next week will be creating their own political party with their own political issues that they care about. So trying to engage the students in a more fluid environment. I think the number one way to do that is finding a way to tie the content back to their own personal beliefs and their everyday life. And I think that's probably the number one way we have been successful here in the option program over the last 3 years, is all 4 content areas have really been able to do that successfully.
I remember when I started personalized learning, you would hear, well, I don't know if kindergartners can do that, or I don't know if first graders can do that. They can. Hi there, my name is Sarah Vaughn. I teach first grade at Baxter Primary School in the Putnam County School System. I first learned about personalized learning mostly through Ed Elements. I started personalized learning though before, I just didn't really have a name for it. Education Elements really helped PL in my classroom though, because it opened my eyes to other ways of implementing PL, like through a playlist. That is one of my favorite ways of getting in small group time and letting my kids have a voice and a choice in what they are learning and what they're doing to demonstrate their mastery in their learning. My students have a must-do and a may-do list. We relate it to mustard and mayonnaise. Things on the must-do list are things that we have to get done. We talk about our favorite playlists, and I like to listen to my favorite songs in a different order, so they can complete the tasks on that list in any order that they would like. On the may-do list, those are things that might interest them, and they can do any or all of them. Doesn't matter. There's their voice, there's their choice, and eventually we'll have several things on the must-do list for them to accomplish, and even some things that are differentiated or even put out there for them to self-reflect and pick which activity would best meet their needs. But this is one of my all-time favorite PO models, and it is the playlist. When I look around my classroom, I see students who have all kinds of different backgrounds. They have different experiences. We have students who have been exposed to great things. We have students who have been exposed to not so great of things. No matter what a child has been exposed to, what they've experienced in their 6 years of life so far, I want every child to come to learning on an even playing field. Creating that equity is huge. I'm a firm believer that the students that come into this classroom can be independent and self-sufficient learners. I believe that my students, even though they are 6 and 7, they deserve a voice, they deserve a choice, and PL brought that to even their learning. I find that my students become more independent, and they also become more aware of themselves as learners. They know how they're doing. They are able to guide themselves through their own learning tasks and talk on their own about their success. That is one of the biggest impacts that I've seen in my classroom, is that my students take ownership. Student ownership is not just being able to reflect on your work and know and take ownership of that, but it's also being able to reflect on your behavior and how you're meeting the expectations and taking ownership of that. We know that we're going to make mistakes in our learning. We know we're going to make mistakes in our behavior. And guess what? That's okay. Every day I go home and I think of, what can I do to make tomorrow better, to make learning even better, make it more personalized, make it more interesting? What can I do to be better than I was the day before? And I'm so excited to learn even more and to continue to grow with personalized learning in my classroom.
Wow. Well, we want to thank all the teachers that we just featured for sharing their perspectives and for taking us into our classrooms, including Angie Lee, Sarah Therio, Meredith Tansey, Ashley Brown, Sarah Vaughn, Matt Michalik, Carrie Rutigliano, and Erica Gardner. We want to thank you so much for sharing and opening your classrooms. And we also want to thank everyone for watching today. A few reminders. Next week, we take a deeper dive into the Core 4 personalized learning. You can register at our website at elements.com/core-4-webinar. And that's next Thursday, October 14th. Also, you can join an expert conversation focused on the 4 principles at student-centered design, nurturing learning environments, equity-focused, and data-informed. These are all being held this month, and you can go to our website for more information on those at elements.com/expert-convos. We'd love to see you there. And of course, you can now download your copy of the updated Core 4 white paper, which contains all the guidance that we discussed earlier today. In closing, we'd love your feedback. We invite feedback. We'd love to invite you to complete this form you can see the web address there @elements.com, PL-event-survey, and enter something to win some swag. Who doesn't want @Elements swag? We thank you. We invite you to connect with us, to learn with us, because we know that schools grow when people grow. So thank you very much. And we're glad that you could join us today.